in October 1995. The Apple IIGS port was started in fall 1994 by Vitesse with Heinemann as the initial developer, with later graphics assistance by Ninja Force Entertainment, but due to licensing problems with ID it was not released until February 1998. An open-source iOS port programmed by John Carmack himself was released in 2009. An unofficial port for the Game Boy Color was made in 2016. An Android port titled Wolfenstein 3D Touch, later renamed DC Wolf, was released and published by Beloco Games. Other releases include the Game Boy Advance, 2002, Xbox Live Arcade, and PlayStation Network. These ports' sound, graphics, and levels sometimes differ from the original. Many of the ports include only the Apogee episodes, but the iOS port includes Spear of Destiny, and a 2007 Steam release for PC, Mac OS, and Linux includes all of the Form-Gen episodes. Bethesda Softworks, whose parent company bought ID Software in 2009, celebrated the 20th anniversary of Wolfenstein 3DS release by producing a free-to-play browser-based version of the game in 2012, though the website was removed a few years later. Reception, edit. ID had no clear expectations for Wolfenstein's commercial reception, but hoped that it would make around $60,000 in its first month. The first royalty check from Apogee was instead for $100,000. The game was selling at a rate of 4,000 copies a month by mail order. PC Zone quoted a shareware distributor as saying Wolfenstein 3D was the top shareware seller of 1992. By the end of 1993, sales of the Apogee episodes of Wolfenstein 3D as well as Spear of Destiny had reached over 100,000 units each, with the Apogee game still selling strongly by the end of the year as its reach spread without newer retail titles to compete with it for shelf space. By mid-1994 150,000 shareware copies were registered and ID Software had sold another 150,000 retail copies of Spear of Destiny. The company estimated that 1 million shareware copies were distributed worldwide. Over 20% of its sales were from outside of the US. Despite the lack of any marketing or non-English description and despite the game being banned from sale in Germany due to its inclusion of Nazi symbols by the Federal Department for Media harmful to young persons in 1994, and again in 1997 for Spear of Destiny. Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu reviewed the game 5 months after release, describing it as, "View from the character's point of view, it's a real shooter. The game is easy to play, and it runs well. This is the only game of its type." The Apogee episode's sales vastly exceeded the shareware game sales record set by the developer's earlier Commander Keen series and provided ID with a much higher profit margin than the sales of its retail counterpart, where Commander Keen games were bringing Apogee around $10,000 a month. Wolfenstein 3D averaged $200,000 per month for the first year and a half. The game sold 250,000 copies by 1995 and grossed $2.5 million in revenue. Wolfenstein 3D won the 1992 Best Arcade Game Award from Compute, the 1992 Most Innovative Game and Best Action Game Awards from Video Games and Computer Entertainment, the 1992 Reader's Choice Action/Arcade Game Award from Game Bytes, the 1993 Best Action/Arcade Game, Best Entertainment Software, and People's Choice Awards at the Shareware Industry Awards, the 1993 Best Action Game Award from Computer Gaming World, and a Cody Award from the Software Publishers Association for Best Action/Arcade Game. It was the first shareware title to win a Cody, and ID, with 6 employees, became the smallest company to ever receive the award. Wolfenstein 3D was noted as one of the top games of the year at the 1993 Game Developers Conference. Wolfenstein 3D was well received by reviewers upon its release. Chris Lombardi of Computer Gaming World praised the sparse, but gorgeous, frighteningly realistic, and extremely violent graphics, as well as the immersive sound and music. Noting the violence, he warned those sensitive to such things to stay home. Lombardi concluded that Wolfenstein 3D, alongside Ultima Underworld released 2 months prior, was the first game technologically capable of creating a sufficient element of disbelief suspension to emotionally immerse the player in a threatening environment, stating that they knew of no other game that could evoke such intense psychological responses from its players. Wolfenstein twice received 5 out of 5 stars in Dragon in 1993. Hartley, Patricia, and Kirk Lesser termed it definitely one of the best arcade games ever created for PC, highly praised the graphics and sound, and said that the fast-paced action could keep players enthralled for weeks if they were not concerned about the violence. Sandy Peterson, in the first eye of the monitor column, claimed that there is nothing else quite like Wolfenstein and that it had evolved almost beyond recognition from the original 1981 game. He enthusiastically praised the speed and gameplay, calling it a fun game with lots of action and a fun, fairly mindless romp, though he did note that at higher difficulty settings or later levels it became extremely hard. The Spear of Destiny retail episode was also rated highly by Computer Gaming World's Brian A. Walker, who praised the added enemy types, though he noted that it was essentially the same game as the shareware episodes. Fortune's Spear of Destiny mission packs Return to Danger and Ultimate Challenge were reviewed by Paul Hyman of Computer Gaming World, who praised the updated graphical details and sound, as well as the smooth gameplay, but noted its overall dated graphics and lack of gameplay changes from the original game. The early ports of the game also received high reviews, though their sales have been described as dismal. The 4 reviewers of Electronic Gaming Monthly called the Super NES version a good conversion that retained the good music, huge levels, and overall fun of the original game and dismissed the censoring in the version as inconsequential. In 1995, Total ranked the game 84th on their top 100 SNES games list. Electronic Gaming Monthly rated the Jaguar version similarly to the Super NES version, commenting that the graphics and audio were superior to other versions of the game, but criticizing the faster movement of the player character as making it less fun to play. A GamePro review of the Jaguar port was highly complimentary, saying Wolfenstein 3D set a new standard for PC gaming and that the Jaguar version was the best to date, and better than the original due to its increased graphics and sound capabilities. A next-generation review of the Jaguar version was less enthusiastic, terming it good but not up to the standards of newer games. Its review of the Macintosh version of the game was also mild, stating that there isn't a staggering amount of freshness here, but the action is fast, deadly, and, surprise, addictive. Major Mike of GamePro commended the 3D version's complete absence of pixelation, fast scaling, rousing music, and high-quality sound effects, but criticized the controls as overly sensitive. He concluded that the game, then over 3 years old, still packs a punch as a first-person shooter. Wolfenstein 3D won GamePro's Best 3D Game of 1995 award, beating the acclaimed The Need for Speed and D Maximum, on the other hand, while stating that the 3D port was better than the original and as good as the Jaguar version, felt that it was so aged compared to recent releases like Hexen, Beyond Heretic and the PlayStation version of Doom that a new port was pointless, with the game now somewhat tiresome and very, very repetitive. A reviewer for Next Generation asserted that Wolfenstein 3D was still as addictive as it ever was, but essentially agreed with Maximum, contending that anyone interested in first-person shooters would have either already played it on another platform or moved on to more advanced games in the genre. More modern reviews include one for the Xbox 360 port in 2009 by Ryan McCaffrey of Official Xbox Magazine, who heavily criticized it for non-existent enemy AI and bad level design and found it notably inferior to Doom, and one that same year by Damon Hatfield of IGN, who gave the PlayStation Network release of the game a warm reception, saying that while it was dated and flawed, it was required playing for any first-person shooter fan. Legacy, edit. Wolfenstein 3D has been called the grandfather of 3D shooters, specifically first-person shooters, because it established the fast-paced action and technical prowess commonly expected in the genre and greatly increased the genre's popularity. It has also been called the Citizen Kane of shooters. Although some prior computer shooting-based games existed, they were generally scrolling shooters, while Wolfenstein 3D helped move the market towards first-person shooters. It has also been credited with confirming shareware distribution as a serious and profitable business strategy at the time. Video Games and Computer Entertainment claimed in September 1992 that the game justified the existence of shareware, and in July 1993 Computer Gaming World claimed that it almost single-handedly demonstrated the viability of shareware as a method of publishing, leading to a wave of other shareware first-person shooters. The game's high revenue compared to prior, smaller 2D titles led Apogee as well as others in the shareware games industry to move towards larger, 3D titles built by larger development teams. During development, ID approached Sierra Entertainment, then one of the biggest companies in the industry and employer of several of their idols, with the goal of seeing if they could make a deal with the company. After viewing Commander Keen and an early version of Wolfenstein 3D, CEO Ken Williams offered to buy ID Software for $2.5 million and turn it into an in-house development studio. The team was excited by the deal, but had felt there was a large culture clash between the two companies during their visit to Sierra and were hesitant to accept. Romero proposed asking for $100,000,000 in cash up front as part of the deal rather than solely accepting payment in Sierra stock as a measure of Williams's seriousness. Williams refused, which ID interpreted to mean that Williams did not truly recognize the potential of Wolfenstein 3D and the company, and the deal fell through, causing ID to decide to remain an independent company for the foreseeable future. By the end of 1993, just before the release of their next game, Doom, the success of Wolfenstein 3D led ID to receive multiple calls every month from investment companies looking to make ID a publicly traded company, which were all turned down. In 1996, Computer Gaming World declared Wolfenstein 3D the 97th best computer game ever released. The game is also recognized as the principal cause for Germany banning video games that contain certain types of symbols and imagery from extremist groups like Nazis under its Strafgesetzbuch Section 86 up through 2018. Section 86 had social adequacy allowances for works of art, but in 1998, a High District Frankfurt court case evaluating the Nazi imagery within Wolfenstein 3D determined that video games did not fall under this allowance. The court ruled that because video games drew younger audiences, this could lead to them growing up with these symbols and insignias and thereby becoming used to them, which again could make them more vulnerable for ideological manipulation by National Socialist ideas. Up through 2018, the Germany Software Ratings Board, the Unterhaltungssoftware Selbstkontrolle, USK, refused to rate any game that included inappropriate symbols and imagery, effectively banning the game for sale within the country. By May 2018, a new court ruling was made in response to a parody web browser game, in which the Public Prosecutor's Office confirmed there were no breaches of the law in the game's content. Following this, the ban was reversed by the German government in August, having determined that the Wolfenstein 3D decision was outdated since the USC now included age ratings alongside other content warnings, and that video games should be considered as art under the social adequacy allowance. In November 2019, Wolfenstein 3D was formally struck from the index, the list of games banned from sale in Germany. After the game's release, ID Software licensed the engine to other developers, like the Commander Keen engine before it, as part of a series of engine licensing deals that ID has made throughout its history. Games using the Wolfenstein 3D engine or derivatives of it include Blackstone, the Capstone Software games Corridor 7 and Operation Body Count, as well as Super 3D Noah's Ark. Apogee intended to produce an expansion pack in 1993 titled Rise of the Triad, Wolfenstein 3D Part 2, designed by Tom Hall using the Wolfenstein 3D engine, but during development the game was changed into a standalone title with an enhanced engine, Rise of the Triad. Additionally, Softisk produced Catacomb Abyss using the prototype Wolfenstein 3D engine from Catacomb 3D as part of the Catacomb Adventure series trilogy of sequels. Although Wolfenstein 3D was not designed to be editable or modified, players developed character and level editors to create original alterations to the game's content. John Carmack and Romero, who had played numerous mods of other games, were delighted, and overrode any concerns about copyright issues by the others. The modding efforts of Wolfenstein players led ID Software to explicitly design later titles like Doom and Quake to be easily modifiable by players, even including the map editing tools ID Software used with the games. The source code for the original Wolfenstein 3D engine was released by ID in 1995. When making the 2009 iOS port, Carmack used some of the enhancements to the engine made by fans after its release. The game's technical achievements also led to numerous imitators such as Ken's Labyrinth, Nightmare 3D, The Terminator, Rampage, Terminal Terror and The Fortress of Dr. Radicki, among others. Although ID Software did not develop another Wolfenstein game, as their development focus shifted to Doom shortly after release, and has never returned to the series, multiple Wolfenstein titles have been produced by other companies, sometimes using game engines developed by ID. The first of these newer Wolfenstein games was Return to Castle Wolfenstein in 2001, a reboot of the series, and the most recent titles are the 2019 games Wolfenstein, Youngblood and Wolfenstein, Cyberpilot. References, edit.